if you go back, in rural Africa, we can say that people still know how to live in community, but that's because they have nothing else. If we take away so many of the comforts and the things that we worry about and that we have here in the West, actually we would just come back to that level of community and being together.
What can we learn? What have we forgotten about the community?
Oh my gosh, where to start? I think blaming each other, acceptance, listening, really listening. I think that we've lost the ability to a certain degree on how to create real relationships.
Thank you, Doug, for being here. Super excited for our conversation. I want to start from you sharing your ideal vision for humanity. Best case scenario for human future. What would that look like?
I think the future of humanity is going backwards and relearning essentially what we've forgotten. I think that we need to stop making each other wrong and assuming that there's only one way of doing things, because the richness of unity is by everybody bringing and doing what they do in the way that they do it, and no one is right and no one is wrong. That every time we blame somebody or we tell somebody that they're wrong, we're pointing our finger at them, but actually we're pointing 3 fingers at ourselves. So it's that constant reminder that actually our attitude and our way of being is more important than what somebody else is doing right or doing wrong.
Wow. How did you get that interesting
I'm not sure, I heard it somewhere. But that's what's interesting. I don't think that there's anything out there that's new today. And we're in this constant desire or need to discover the next best thing. And there's nothing that's new.
That's right, yeah.
And actually what anybody is ever doing is just repackaging the old and bringing it out in a way that is palatable to anybody else. And so if I think about what I want for humanity, is that we do create that sense of unity, that there is that reality that we are all interconnected, and we need to start realizing that. And the only way that we're going to realize that is by taking full responsibility ourselves, to stop blaming other people and to stop being divisive. If you look at any community in any rural village, there's differences. Of course there are differences, but actually their capacity to acknowledge their differences and still live together and work together and collaborate together and be in community together, that's actually what we need.
Mm-hmm. And where does rhythm and music play a role in building that type of future?
When you go back and you look at the rhythms of the djembe, which is what I'm trained in, all the rhythms that you play, you hear in nature. I can be in my house in rural Senegal and there's a bird singing in the morning, and it's actually the same rhythm as I would be playing on the drum when I'm playing with drummers in the afternoon. All the rhythms fit together. The traditional rhythms, they fit together perfectly. And that's what humanity needs to do. Definitely coming back to nature. That's one of the key things that we need to do, is just to realize the power of nature. But nature actually all works in harmony together. So we need to come back to that. And music is, particularly rhythm, I would say, and particularly primal rhythm, is really an example of that.
And would you say the music that humans create is very much a deviation from a natural rhythm, a natural pattern, or is it still part of it? It's just a novel rhythm that doesn't exist in the nature that exists pre-humans?
So I would say that all music comes from Africa. So if you think about blues, if you think about pop music, it all comes from West Africa.
Yeah.
The slave trade, the slaves were pushed on boats. The shortest distance between the Americas and Africa is that bulge on the side of Africa, which is West Africa. And that's where the djembe comes from. Mm-hmm. If you think about what's landed in Cuba, it's the Yoruba, that's Nigeria and Nigerian rhythms. And then what went into St. Louis, the west of Africa was essentially a French colony, so it's all French speaking as well. And Mardi Gras, all of that comes from West Africa. Blues comes from West Africa. If you listen to some ancient music or old music from Mali, you just hear blues in there. So here in the West, what we were doing, we were going into classical music, and then all of a sudden syncopation arrived, which was Scott Joplin, the pianist. And then from there, funk was born, and then jazz was born. The rhythms of all of that all come from Africa. That's their origins.
Would you then also say, is that the same trait as like all humans come from Africa, if you go back all the way?
If you go back all the way, I think the whole foundation of music is more recent. But if you actually trace humanity back, we all come from Africa. I mean, it's Mother Africa. There was that book called Sapiens, It tells the story of our shared humanity. We're all from Africa.
That's right.
We trace this all far enough back.
That's right, yeah. Now I'd like for you to give a little bit of background because you have an interesting path that you walked on. To share with me that story.
So I'm an ex-documentary producer for the BBC. And actually the last 2 years that I worked in television, I worked on a documentary that was about African elephants. And the film was all about how elephants change in Africa according to their habitat. So in the Central African rainforests, where the elephants have to navigate through the forest, they're much, much smaller, like pygmies. They're much, much smaller. Oh. And if you go down to Namibia, they basically have to walk 50 miles every day between food and water, and they have to walk in sand dunes. So the biggest elephants in Africa are in Namibia, and they've got these huge long legs, and they've got big splayed feet so that they can walk.
It's great on the
so that they can walk easily in the sand dunes.
Right.
And then if you go into Uganda, that's where the ivory trade was at its worst. So Idi Amin came into Uganda in the late 70s, early 80s, killed all the elephants with tusks. If you now go back, the majority of the elephants in Uganda only have small tusks or no tusks at all. So that's an evolution in 40, 45 odd years. It's kind of extraordinary.
They're born with a short...
Yeah. Because they know that if they realize that if they had these amazingly big tusks, they would be killed for the ivory trade.
Wow.
So they've got these small little pointed tusks in Uganda. And then if you go into Kenya, where they're in theory protected, that's where you see the kind of model, majestic African elephant with these big tusks, these majestic looking animals. And so depending where you go in Africa, the elephants change according to their habitat. So that's what the film was about. So that was an extraordinary introduction into Africa, because I got to travel all over the continent and experience the pygmies in Central African Republic and the Bushmen in Namibia. And it was really extraordinary. And in parallel to that, a friend of mine said, come on a djembe workshop. The djembe is the West African shaped drum. And I fell
African friend, was that somebody you met already there? Or?
It was no, it wasn't someone I'd met in Africa. It was actually a white guy who had been studying in the Ivory Coast, and I went on the workshop with him. And at the end of that day, I said to myself, one day I'm gonna go to Africa and I'm gonna study the music. And right after working on this film about elephants, my boss offered me this job to work on a film about gorillas. And when I put the budget and the schedule together, I realized I was going to get between 7 and 12 weeks travel over a 3-year period. And that was my moment. I said to my boss, I love you. This has been an amazing experience, but I have to follow my heart now. So I packed my job in at the BBC and I took myself off to West Africa on this initial 6-month study trip. And I played 6 hours with the African Masters every day until I couldn't move my fingers. And it was an extraordinary 6 months. I started off in Gambia, and then I went to Senegal, and I went to Guinea, and just played and learnt. And interestingly, even after 6 months of that intensity, I'm still a beginner. And now I've been playing for 20 odd years. I have a house in Senegal. Yeah. When I go back, I play 3-4 hours every day. And I can come somewhere like here in Miami, and they go, "Oh my gosh, he's so good." And yet when I go back to Guinea or Senegal and I'm playing with the African Masters, I realize I'm just, they've been playing far longer than I have. And also what you can do with rhythm is infinite. It's never ending. I mean, it's not just the beat in 4, it's how you find the offbeats, but then there's the offbeats of the offbeats and the offbeats of the offbeats of the offbeats. And so you can really float around. So solo phrases are invented and created. And I mean, when I'm in West Africa, I literally just play the foundation rhythms for the dancers. And I can be playing the same thing 3 hours, same 3-4 hours.
How common is it to play the instrument there? Like most people know how to drum?
No.
Right.
No, it's the same as here, a musician is a musician. You can learn in the capital cities today. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the real roots of the rhythms, they come from the rural villages and the indigenous way of life. And every rhythm has a different meaning and a different song and a different dance and a different reason for being played. originally the drummer and the rhythms accompanied every aspect of life. When there was the fishermen go out to fish, there's a specific rhythm.
Yeah.
When a boy becomes a man, there's a specific rhythm. When a girl becomes a woman, there's a specific rhythm. You play to harvest, there's another rhythm. And when the rains come, there's another rhythm. And so
that rhythm just like, how did they come up with it? Like, obviously through evolution, it's a long process that how it all evolved.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. All I know that it's hugely rooted in tradition.
For sure. Yeah.
And unfortunately, more that the rhythms are coming into the capital cities, and to make the djembe and that music accessible, African ballet. It's not ballet, we know ballet, but African ballets are created. And then little by little, the traditions are getting lost, unfortunately. I guess that's...
Well, it has to be digitized so we can recreate it in the future, or at least encapsulate it in the rawest form.
In the rawest form. And there are masters that are still alive that know all the traditional rhythms that are still being played.
Yeah.
And why they're being played, or why they were played, and what the songs were, and what the words of the songs were, and what the meanings were. So,
do they use music as medicine, like as healing practice as well? Do they see them as like healers, those who drum, or more as a performers, or someone who creates the space for a particular, I don't know, setting or something like that? Or do they, because I was trying to compare them to, let's say, indigenous people in the Amazon who serve the medicine, and they're like medicine people. So these are different type of, they consider them as something else, right? They're not necessarily.
That's an interesting question. There's certain musicians that I play with.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very, very lucky because I've been on the circuit for, nearly 30 years. And so I have the opportunity to play with like the most incredible masters of the drum. And there's a couple of them where I can feel and I can sense a complete shift of energy when they play. And they can be playing the same rhythm as somebody else, but when they play, something else happens. And I can't necessarily put that something else into words. But it's there was a book by a guy called Malidoma Some, who he was basically brought up in the Dagan tribes of Upper Volta, which is now Burkina Faso, which is a country in West Africa. And he was taken from his family by the missionaries and then brought to the US. So, and he was a Marabout. So he was like this traditional spirit doctor. But in parallel, he studied, he had a Western education, and he has, 2 or 3 PhDs, and he died a few years ago. But he wrote a book called Of Water and the Spirit. And in one of the chapters in the book, he talks about how the artists are the gateways, are the keepers to the gateways to the other world. And so I would say, yes, they are healers, and yes, they are shamans in their way.
Yep.
But they're essentially musicians who are masters of their craft. So, and I had an experience of a Marabout when I was I've had several experiences, but there was one experience I had where this finger, I don't know whether you can see it on camera, this finger here, I had a big problem with the articulation in my forefinger, in my right hand. And I went and got my hand scanned. I went to see a Western doctor, and he said, "Oh, you've got to stop playing djembe, the fascia's all messed up, and by the time you're 50, you're not going to be able to move your hands, and you have to stop playing djembe." 2 weeks later, I had a trip booked to Burkina Faso to carry on studying. Like I was going out for a couple of months. And on my, 3rd or 4th day, I had this encounter with a Marabout, and I went to see him the next day, and I said, "I've got this pain in this finger, and I have to do something about it, and what can I do?" And he said, "Come back tomorrow." So I get back and see him the next day. And he says, "I'm going to put this gourd, this clay pot in your hand. And I want you to stand under that tree over there until I come back." He said, "And the gourd's going to get very, very, very hot. But you just stand there under that tree until I come back." Okay, I can do that. So he puts the gourd in my hand, no flames at all. He sprinkles, I don't know what in there, some herbs in there.
Yeah.
He prayed over the pot. He spat in the pot and it got really hot. And I'm standing under the tree. And I was standing under the tree and I was standing under the tree. I don't know, it must have been 2-3 hours later. He comes back and I mean, my hands were like, it was really hot.
Yeah.
He takes the gourd away. He says, don't touch a djembe for 24 hours. So I didn't touch a djembe for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Since the pain has gone and it never came back.
Okay. Wow.
And so there's so much we don't understand in the Western world.
Totally. Yeah.
If you,
Interesting. Yeah.
it's a known fact that if you make love and you play your djembe without showering and washing with an intention to to be clean, when you play, the skin will break. And that's happened to me. And everyone knows that. It's like all the master drummers know that.
Wow.
And so explain that.
How do you explain that? What any kind of rational, like what?
That's the thing, is that we're so hooked into what we can see.
Yeah.
And yet our 3D world, we don't understand anything. We really don't understand anything. And we can come up with all of these human ideas and notions of how this works or that works. But actually we don't understand anything.
Mm-hmm. How much of it so I see us conscious beings as like portals between the 3D world and the spiritual world. How much of the importance an instrument like a djembe could play in bringing the spirit world into this reality? I mean,
personally, I think that that's what happens.
Yeah.
And I think the djembe does its magic, and I don't think that we have to understand. I mean, when I go into a corporate setting, I can't talk about energy. I can't talk about a person's energy and maintaining our energy during the day so that we can be in a state of peak performance. I can say that, but I can't talk about other worlds or the spiritual realm, because that's not what the corporate world. Probably that they may need to hear that.
Yeah.
That's a matter of opinion, but they don't want to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it happens.
Yeah.
And I think that the human being, with our limited minds, which are already extraordinary, we need to let go of the whole notion of having to try to understand everything, because we never will. And it's a question of always coming back. So what are you feeling? What's going on? And even that you can't put into words all the time. I mean, I know that after I've played, something happens inside. I can call it, and I feel more awakened. I feel more energetic. I feel more connected. I can have a deeper connection with a person in front of me.
Yeah.
I can put that into words, but it's probably a whole lot more that I can't even...
Yeah.
My limited 3D human body, I can't even find the words and conceptualize. And
for sure, it sounds like it's some kind of like a recalibration that happens through the process, and so you're becoming much more close to the center of your essence and not pulled. Your energy is like very grounded and very aligned or something like that.
Yeah, I think it is. And even, I mean, I have one thing that I do in organizations. Sometimes I take drums for everybody, as I've got like 3,000 djembes. So I bring djembes.
You have 3,000?
Yeah.
Where are they now?
They're in a stock in Switzerland at the moment.
Yeah?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I did my thing with Oprah, I bought 1,850 djembes.
How much is each one?
I get them for around $30 each.
Okay,
like
yeah, it's over cheaper. Yeah, but still, that's a lot. Yeah,
it's it's a fair amount of money of what I've spent.
Do you have them like in the container, or how do you ship them like that?
So pre-COVID, I was doing all the corporate work. I had also created this stage show, which basically told the story of our shared ancestry. The fact, if you trace it all far enough back, we all come from Africa. And then the story went on to explore the influence of the rhythms of the djembe on all the pop music we listen to today. That's how I understand what happened, and how we arrived at syncopation and jazz and funk and pop music here. But at the time, I had trucks going around Europe when we were on tour with a stage show and we were doing the corporate work. I had trucks driving around Europe. It was crazy.
Right, handling them all. Somebody.
Oh, the logistics. Was insane.
Man, yeah.
But then during COVID, I sold all the vehicles and put everything in stock because I didn't know when everything was going to start shifting again.
Right.
And so they're in this stock in a small town in Switzerland, close to where I have my European base.
Wow. Do you see the future for them? Like, do you, or right now your attention is somewhere else? So right now it's kind of like they're there and I don't really have plans for activating 3,000 gyms.
Oh, I still get inquiries. So I got an inquiry. I was talking to a client a couple of days ago here in the States for a program in August next year. That would be 3,000 people. So it's 3,000 drums. I've got something in France in a couple of weeks' time. That's for 700 people. So I'll move 700 drums across France.
Shipping like that is also...
so yeah, the logistics are complicated. But then I think what's interesting is I also have a reduced format where I bring my team with me virtually.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I beam people in and we have these conversations about rhythm and with different team members, because I think what's interesting is for the corporate world particularly to have their perspective, not just as a drummer but also as a musician. The lessons of music are quite profound for the corporate sector, in terms of improvisation, in terms of active listening, in terms of what it takes to perform when you're on stage every single night. All of these messages are incredibly useful for the corporate sector. So what I do is I bring my team with me virtually, and then I bring the room to life with body percussion. So people are playing the rhythms that they might be playing on the drum, but they're playing them on their own body. And actually, even when you're doing something like that with rhythm, I think when you're doing, when you say a word over and over and over and over and over and over again, it stops making sense.
100%, yeah.
Right? So you're going from, the prefrontal neocortex to the old brain.
Sure.
And that's why when things stop making sense, but actually start making sense, interestingly. But, and the same happens with rhythm. And so when people engage, even if it's in a body percussion context,
something like an trance state of some sort, right?
Something else happens, and so just you don't even need the drum. Actually, I mean, you do,
right? To
a certain degree. It depends the impact you want.
The drum, it sounds like it's more of like a bicycle. When you're trying to get from point A to point, you can walk it doing this.
Yeah,
or you can also bike it.
Yeah,
or like fly.
And there's places that you can get to, and I can take groups to with the drum that I can't get to with body percussion. I mean, it's just, but. I think what I've noticed over the years is, since I've kind of created a solo version of being able to go in as a conference speaker, and is that when you're not using the drum, the learning sticks. When you're using the drum, people get caught up in this exotic, oh my God, this guy brought in thousands of drums today.
Right.
Then they wouldn't go home and say, oh, we had this body percussion experience today. They would say, oh, we had this learning experience.
Right.
So I think something else happens when you take the drum away.
Interesting, right.
Which is interesting.
Right. They're almost like giving the power to the drum, and then when the drum is taken away, they're like, okay, I'm powerless in that domain.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. Which is interesting is in another sense is, if you go back to Africa, we can say, in rural Africa, I'm talking about, we can say that people still know how to live in community, but that's because they have nothing else, right? So if we take away so many of the comforts and the things that we worry about and that we have here in the West, actually we would just come back to that level of community and being together.
What can we learn? What have we forgotten about the community? How to live really harmoniously with others?
Oh my gosh, where to start with a question like that? That's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question. I think blaming each other. I think acceptance. I think listening, but really listening. I think that we've lost the ability to a certain degree on how to create real relationships. So that sense of mirroring each other. It always strikes me, I can be in West Africa talking to someone and I'll just to play around, I'll cross my arms and then they'll cross their arms. And so they'll always mirror something back.
Right.
And we're not listening deeply enough to do that often enough.
I understand, yeah.
And I don't know whether they do that consciously or subconsciously.
Right.
But it happens.
It's probably both, yeah. Would you say this whole individualism train or like development of Western world, it actually pulled us apart? Like it's not serving us at all.
It's not serving us at all. Yeah. And we have too much. And so we've lost the ability to be resilient. I mean, in the village where I have my house in Senegal, I'd seen my son be born in a Western hospital. His mum had a cesarean, and I was there present throughout the whole birth. And firstly, cesareans don't happen very often in Africa, if at all. Just because
C-section?
Yeah, C-section.
Yeah. Right.
Just because people are so grounded into the earth, right? So that it happens far less.
For sure.
That's for sure. And probably in rural villages, when a C-section needs to happen, there's probably a death,
for sure,
sadly. So anyway, in the village, I decided I wanted to see a birth. And so I went to the medical center. There's a very small, severely ill-equipped medical center in the village.
Yeah.
And I said to the woman there who runs the medical center, who's the village doctor, the village nurse, the village pharmacist, the village midwife, she does everything. And I said to her, I want to see a birth. And she's like, no problem. So 2:00 in the morning, 3 or 4 nights later, my phone rings. She said, there's baby coming. You have to come now.
Wow.
So I get on my kind of sand-filled motorbike, because in the village where I have my house, there's no paved roads. And I dodged a couple of snakes on my way to the medical center. And as I got to the medical center, there was a power cut. And this woman brought this baby into the world holding a pocket torch between her shoulder and her ear like this. Wow. She wouldn't even let me hold the light for her. And it was like water off a duck's back. She'd done it so many times.
Wow.
And here, that would be scandalous. And there, they just find a way. There's always a way. There's always a way.
Damn.
And if something's broken, they find a way to fix it. And okay, it's not just ordering a new part.
Yeah.
On one of the corporate trips that I ran back in 2019, just before COVID, we were driving from the capital of the southern part of Senegal, a village or a city called Chonkasil, and we were driving up to the village in 2 buses, and the accelerator cable broke on one of the buses, and these corporate guys are looking at their watches, and they're going, but you said we, and they're looking at their watches, and I'm like, guys, this is day 2 of our retreat. Here, no, I said to them, you have watches, but here they have time. Mm-hmm. So let go of all of that notion of what I said in terms of what was going to happen at what time, because it's not going to be like that.
Right.
And these guys ended up fixing the accelerator cable with something that looked like a paperclip, right? And we got to the village, and okay, we got to the village an hour and a half later.
Wow. Man, wow, living in that village, how much time do you spend there every year?
I try and go 4 or 5 times every year. I actually haven't been this year. Last year I went 6 times.
Wow.
I didn't go obviously for a couple of years over COVID.
Yeah.
But it's a place to resource, let go. When I run the leadership retreats that I do, people get to go into village school, 70 kids in a class, 80 kids in a class. The teachers just deal with it.
The same ages, 70 of the same ages, like the big...
So
pretty big village then, I would say.
The village got about 3,000 people.
Okay, yeah.
So about 700-800 kids. There's 12 teachers.
A lot of kids, right? People have a lot of kids, right?
Yeah.
Because the death rate is probably higher too.
The death rate is probably higher.
Yeah.
And it's in Senegal. So Senegal is an interesting country because in the middle of Senegal, you've got another country that's called the Gambia. It's like a slither in the middle of Senegal. And the government in Gambia had slapped a fishing tax on all the fishermen. Fishermen didn't want to pay it. So they either went north into Senegal from the Gambia or south. Oh. What's interesting is that Senegal is French speaking and Gambia is English speaking. Oh. So all of a sudden in this village where I am, there was an influx of 100, 150 kids who didn't speak the same language. Oh. And so in the schools, what they do is rather than separating kids by their age, they separate them by their ability. Mm. So you can have a kid that's 15 in the same class as somebody who's 8 or 9 because that kid has not had the opportunity to learn how to read or write, and that's where their level is, and so that's how they do it.
Oh, crazy! Yeah. What else have you learned being there, and why do you keep going back? Like, what brings you back?
So every time I go back, I just resource. It's kind of a reset.
Yeah.
I come back to the Western world after spending a week or 2 or 3 or a month in the village. I'm like, what are we doing here? I'm particularly close to one of the village elders. He lives in a shack. He doesn't really know most days what he's going to eat tomorrow, and he smiles all the time. He knows he's going to get food from somewhere. And so that lack of faith is just something, if we can model that, there's always enough. The world is abundant. But just to see that and experience that in action when their pockets are empty and they have no money and yet there's so much joy and laughter and storytelling and everyone's concerned about everything.
White people, how uncommon or common are there? Like, is everyone dark skinned basically?
Oh yeah, it's only the natives are.
Are you basically like an alien for them, or
no? There was another English guy who actually fell in love. He spent some time in West Africa.
Yeah.
He fell in love in the village with this woman, and they couldn't even speak to each other, but they were just absolutely deeply in love with each other, and they founded a family in the village, and he became a tour guide. And so there were 2 kids in the school who were mixed race, but everyone is accepted. Everyone is welcome. That's for me, community and discovering community in rural Africa was my medicine. I mean, if I think about my story of okay, I was a documentary producer, but going back further than that, I watched my dad have a heart attack when I was 6. I was sent to boarding school when I was 8. My mum died when I was 21. I followed my brother's career path. Initially, I didn't get to university in the travel industry that he works in. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up then following my sister's career path. And she was a film producer, and I went into documentary making for 8 years. Okay. And I'd never really found myself until I discovered the djembe. And then when I went to rural Africa, all of a sudden I understood what community was. Mm-hmm. So, and what a sense of belonging was. Mm-hmm. And it's everything that we've lost here. Hence, the loneliness and isolation epidemic that we're confronted with and living through right now, which is devastating.
For sure, yeah. I definitely wanted to touch on the loneliness epidemic here. I wanted to also ask you about how is technology affecting their life now? Are they, because they probably have cell phones now, like a lot of people. Do you see over time, since you've been there long enough time to almost see pre-technology, like they had nothing at all mm-hmm. at the beginning, and now how has that impacted their lives?
I think the younger generation, it's not great because inevitably if they're sitting in a circle, previously they'd have been chatting and telling stories. They're scrolling through Facebook. And Facebook has a massive following and users in Africa. Huge. So, but I think that the older generation, when I say older generation, I would say 35 upwards, they're actually using their phones as a tool. So, text messaging, connecting, and so then they're not glued to it like we are here, and they're not as reliant on it. And the phone networks go down all the time, or there's a power cut and you can't charge your phone. So a young person here, when they don't have the internet and they don't have their phone, they go out of their mind because they don't know what to do.
That's right, yeah.
Whereas there, if they don't have their phone and they don't have the internet and there's a power cut, you just go back to how it was. It's no big deal.
It's not a big deal. Yeah. I mean, I do see, through this evolutionary process, we are evolving into this new types of beings in a way. Is it good or bad? Everyone will have a different opinion on that, but I do see the trajectory of us becoming something else potentially, some kind of like merger with our tools, with our technology. And it doesn't have to be information technology, but just regular, even like you wearing glasses, it's part of that same thing where we're augmenting our capabilities, or like enhancing our capabilities of or even like having a stick to reach for an apple. That's already an extension of our boundaries, and that's what technology has been doing for us. We're just, the further we are along that evolutionary train, the more we're dependent on those tools. And I don't necessarily think it's bad to be fully dependent on our clothing in a cold climate, for example. It serves us, right? We've invented something, and of course we're gonna freak out if we don't have those tools around. And I think that's partially what might be happening with the newer generation, who are fully relying now on information technology and their cell phones and things. Maybe it's a transitional period in which we find a more stable, more sustainable, and healthy way of interacting with the new augmentation or new enhanced, like some kind of a, yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting. I was just booked to do a keynote at a corporate real estate event in it's actually this week, and I had this conversation with one woman who actually the conversation which she was talking about the metaverse. And it kind of blew my mind. That whole notion that corporate real estate are now investing in the metaverse. So you wear these goggles and it makes your brain think that you're at work with people, therefore you're going to collaborate better. I was like, oh my gosh. But then what do you do after work? Because to a certain degree you lose your social skills. And does that mean then that you go home after work and you play Fortnite?
Right.
And maybe we are evolving to that degree.
Yeah.
But the statistics suggest that so far, what it is doing is just creating more loneliness and more isolation.
It does, yeah.
So I don't know what the right answer is, and I will really want to read this book that's called The Metaverse, because it is taking us somewhere where we've never been before.
Yeah.
But are we actually built for that? I would suggest not, because, or maybe we're just going through this kind of rebirth at the moment that's incredibly painful, and we're going to come out the other side. But I struggle to see that.
Well, when you say a rebuild for that, I don't think the phase that we're in is the final one. It's an evolving one. It's not like we've been built and we can't evolve from there. It's a constant. I mean, like our tool evolution has been exponential, and then the body evolution has been going at the rate of regular, nature evolution, so it's much, much slower. But I think, it's a scary thought, but like all of the computer brain interface experiments that humans are about to embark on and start to implanting chips and see where that's going to take. It could totally end in a dystopian type future, but it could also potentially, it has a trajectory. One branch of the possibility could be kind of what I was describing, becoming new species that can adapt to the fast changes of rapid changes of technology and things like that. A last note on metaverse. You were saying like, it's kind of crazy to think, people are going into this virtual spaces and meeting with people in those environments. There are, let's say, mediums or people who, let's say, they could receive some information about you remotely, or let's say you can have some kind of connection, not a physical one, but through space and time, even through, if you're into spirituality, you can connect to spirit of your grandmother. It's a non-local experience, right? And even in our reality and physical reality, there are people who are able to basically receive information about you. You will be shocked how much they know about you, kind of thing, right? And so it appears to be that there evidence to the fact that we are connecting on a non-local, in a non-local way, and keeping that idea in mind. So if you are able to create a fully simulated virtual reality experience that your body can't even tell that you are in one, it's so, let's say you don't even feel headset on your face, and looking around, you see crystal clear image that your eyes can't tell the difference. There are no pixels. There's just as crystal clear that is. And the person that's in front of you, it's a real person. It's like an avatar of a real person on the other end of the world. It's not like a AI generated thing. It's a real representation of a real person, right? How meaningful would that be, that type of engagement? And also an interesting question is, what would the delta be between a real experience, like being in the physical space, and if your senses can't tell the difference, what would the delta be? And the delta might not be as obvious. Maybe it's the one that's something around our atrophied ability to sense other humans in some way. Maybe we sense it, but we don't really put a lot of attention into it, or it's something beyond our regular six senses, and maybe that will allow us to lean into on a deeper level what it means to be human. Like, on what levels are we connecting? On the soul level, on some kind of energetic level,
But what about touch? What about kissing? What about holding hands?
Yeah.
What about those visceral
we definitely
feelings that we have with our bodies, and you can't get that.
You can't, at least for now, you can't get that.
And I don't want to be hugged by a robot.
I don't either. I don't either. But what if I don't necessarily promote that type of future, and I wouldn't want to live in that type of future, but what if you can simulate that too through computer brain interface, because all of it is just information flowing. Even us touching something, it's not really, it's processed in the brain, right? Like it's all signal in the brain. What if we just tap into that and just sense it there? Again, like that's a controversial topic. I don't necessarily promote that. That's
right. And it's super interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of where we can go with science.
I definitely think it's here to the technology train that we're on. It's moving. You could get off it and live in a small village in Senegal and just completely...
You could. And I can't do more than 3 or 4 weeks there because it goes out of I go out of my mind.
Okay. Maybe share what happens. Boredom?
No, I wouldn't say boredom, but I want to come back to some level of comfort. I want to have more profound conversations as opposed to he said or she said. The kind of it's stuff that happens in communities. I was obviously born and brought up in the West, so there is that familiarity here. But I couldn't see myself doing like what this other English guy did, you know, getting married in the village and being in a relationship with someone who I don't speak the same language as them, and sending my kids off to a school where, you know, they might just be able to learn to read and write, but
Right.
you know, and yet at the same time, I love being able to see a ripe lemon at the top of my tree in the garden and pick up a stick and
For sure.
get that down, and the taste of that is nothing even close to what you might taste here in terms of
100%.
an organic lemon, right?
Sure.
It's
Right.
I mean, I know what food should really taste like. It's so
Interesting. Yeah.
it's
Would you say you're missing an experience of it's almost like an abstract or like another layer of abstraction, more conceptual thinking? It's not, oh, he said, she said, an apple. Everything that you see in the physical world, that's what you talk about. What you maybe miss is like a more subtle, complex ideas and thoughts and experiences that you can share, but they're more like abstracted. Like it's another layer of
it's another layer. Yeah. I think that you know, when you go into a rural village, life is, I wouldn't say, I don't want to use the word survival in a negative way. Because it's pretty much survival here too, right? But it's survival in a community in terms of, you know, you're living day to day, but it's not the burden of how we're going to get through today. Groceries are so expensive, we've got to get through to tomorrow. It's not like not like that. But it's how can we just selflessly support each other. I think those are the beautiful learnings that come from a rural way of life, and deep intuition. I mean, we go on to intuitive courses here. I mean, they just have it. It's just a whole different way of being that we used to have. And is there a way of going back and relearning that and evolving at the same time and giving as much attention to what it means to truly be human, as opposed to, oh, what can we do next with this?
Right. The topic of loneliness in this country, what do you think is the main reason for the state of affairs that we have around that we have the highest levels of loneliness, and at least in the Western world? I don't know, in the development world it's probably also rising, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, suicide,
right,
early deaths. Yeah.
What is the main factors, the main drivers of that, you think?
Well, I think it's that we've forgotten community life, and people might turn around and say, oh, our telephones create loneliness. They exacerbate loneliness, but they haven't created it in the first place. The problem is already there. And I just have this sense that the metaverse, our mobile phones, just really lend more momentum to making that problem exponential, in fact.
Right.
And unless we come back and we really learn what community living is, then I'm not sure what's really good about all of this technology stuff. Okay, yeah, we can do something in the brain where we can experience this or that. Okay, but our raw human needs as human beings being met, and I don't believe they are. And I think it's really that question of coming back to really exploring. So what is, you know, that true community way of life, and what is human connection, and how do we mirror each other, and how do we selflessly support each other? And I think that's what we need to go back to. And actually, even if we come back to that, it doesn't prevent the technological advances. It's just a different way of being.
Mm-hmm. And can we combine that? Can we use technology in a new way, in a different way, use tools that promotes deep human connection, community, those types of things?
I don't believe so, no. Any technological advance that we think is going to promote community, I don't think it does, because it doesn't go to the source of the problem. For example, if you treat somebody through acupuncture, you go to what the root of the problem is. You go to the cause, you don't go to the symptom.
Right.
Whereas Western medicine goes to the symptom. Yeah. My mum had cancer for many years, and I had a terrible COVID experience. I'm only alive here today because of the medical technological advances. There's no question about that. But we're not going to the cause of the problem. And I think that the technology that we've lived has just pulled us further away from the cause. That just inherent need to connect with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see the need, let's say, even in cities, to gather in physical spaces a lot more and have facilitated experience, conscious intent, with the intention to deeply connect, authentically express. Vulnerability is a big component to connection, having more of those spaces and utilizing, that's also what I promote and do, utilizing media and technology in capturing that special events and promoting that type of energy. That's one ways how you can use technology in promoting. You can't just use purely tech, like let's say AI generated video, and then hope that you're going to improve the situation with loneliness in the world, right?
I completely agree.
Yeah,
completely agree. And so that's why I jumped into making this documentary. I never thought I would go back to filmmaking. The film actually, it tells my story. My heart attack with my dad at 6 and boarding school at 8. Watching my mum die when I was 21, and I was hugely lonely. And I discovered togetherness and community and that sense of belonging when I went to Africa. And in parallel, the documentary tells the story of this master drummer from Guinea who was born into community, was never on his own, was always supported in that selfless way that happens in community. And then his mum died and he ended up in Belgium and he discovered loneliness and isolation. And so the documentary is the crossover of those stories. And yet now today, both this master drummer and I were on the same mission, because he travels the world giving these classes in the djembe, but to the general public. And then I'm going and doing my thing around and sharing the wisdom of what I've learned in West Africa. So,
is that a documentary you're currently
it's currently in production.
Right?
Yeah, we've got 3-4 more shoots still to do.
Great.
And then it's actually been presented quite recently to Amazon Prime, Netflix. So
there's a chance.
There's a very high chance. Yeah.
No.
The other thing I suppose as well is that you've got the U.S. General Surgeon, the current U.S. General Surgeon Vivek Murthy, who wrote a book about loneliness and isolation. He did a tour of all the U.S. colleges to bring more awareness to the problem. You can't have somebody go in to a college and say, you need to put your phone down now, kids, because we've got a problem with loneliness and isolation. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
One of my goals with the documentary is to hang on to the educational rights. It's fine to obviously sell the streaming platform rights, et cetera, but to hang on to the educational rights, be able to go into colleges and schools and do a screening of the film, and then take drums for everybody.
Oh, I see.
And
so
then
you hear the rights on that video in other platforms, not just
with the educational rights,
right.
So that we could actually give people a lived experience of what it's of that sense of belonging and sense of community. Because once you have an experience, then you're more likely to be able to integrate it into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're being told, oh yeah, you should put your phone down, who's going to listen to that?
Sure.
It's like,
do you think how much do you have view on creating spaces that invite people to collaborate, to come together? And let's say in places in Africa that you've been to, do they all have communal common spaces in which everyone gathers, just outside? There's no a dedicated space?
I would say the school.
Okay,
The school tends to be the center of the village where meetings happen, and yet if you go further back where there are no schools, then it's just outside spaces. But those spaces are definitely created and used.
Because I feel like one of the issues with the Western world, it's compartmentalize and put everything in the box, and especially during COVID, like places like New York, everyone lived in small little apartments, like little cages. Everyone is separated. There's no open space for everyone to be in. That's part of the problem potentially. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think from what I'm seeing in the States, particularly in America, I've got to say, is that people are saying, oh, this is a community, but you have to pay to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And every time someone says, oh, no, this is a community and the annual fee is X, I think this isn't a community.
Yeah.
It's a network.
It's a network.
And it's fine. Call things for what they really are.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it creates some degree of confusion.
So you're saying community by definition has to be voluntary and free, and everyone just comes to contribute and
selfless.
Right.
For the documentary, we did an interview with the village elder, and I told him my story of COVID, the fact that I got COVID really badly, and that I was put into an artificial coma on an incubator for 6 days, and I spent 6 weeks in hospital, and before I was taken down to intensive care, I was petrified. And so I asked him, I told him that story, and I said to him, what's your biggest fear? I was expecting an answer like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to eat tomorrow, or what happens here in this village if my family falls sick. Those were the answers I was expecting. And actually what he turned around and said blew me away. He said, my biggest fear is what happens to the young people in this village when I die, because I'm not here to guide anybody anymore. And that level of selfless service, we just don't even have that here. This whole notion of businesses being in service. Hello.
Yeah.
And it's fine, and I get it. We need money, and we need to be able to eat and all of those things. And I go into any sector with the work that I do. But some of the stories I hear, it's like, oh my word, really?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, it's not shameless service, it's shameless brainwashing. Yeah. And it's like, where are we going with all of this? And what are we becoming? And this is like...
Yeah, for sure. And what would you say we need to do as a collective? Let's say people now recognizing that is the problem, and now they can play their part. What can they do to...
That's a great question. Have we gone too far?
Yeah.
In terms of our ways of being here, to be able to go back and really understand what community and unity and togetherness really is. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the answer. I'm just out there trying to share my learning and doing my bit and trying to be the best listener I can, and to be as curious as I can be. And I have my opinions. But if one person, it's kind of relevant on the day that we're recording this message. Yeah. If one person becomes president and the other one doesn't, am I going to get angry about it? Am I going to not stop listening? Am I going to stop being curious? I mean, we just, it's about what our core values are at the end. And that has nothing to do with politics. It's not about, being red or blue. It's not. It's just about being human. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what's missing.
More humanness, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm all about finding new ways how to promote more humanness. How can we create more unity and peace in the world? I find, my method is, bringing people together in physical spaces. That is definitely the best approach. But I do also think that the technology and media could be an amplifier of that same intention.
Very much so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly what's happening in the press today is horrendous. It feeds loneliness, isolation, divisiveness. It's not good.
Any last thoughts? Share some nuggets of wisdom that you would like to end the conversation with, potentially.
Well, I actually, if we stop looking at the news and we stop being engaged in that, I think that there is a shift for the better.
Yeah.
So when I started going into companies, doing what I do 25 years ago, I couldn't use the word love, for example. And I can now. And so I think that there is a positive evolution that is happening. And I think that more and more people are on that train.
Yep.
And I think it's actually incredibly positive. There is a shift in that human connection. There really is.
Yep. It's a slow process. It might not be noticeable right at once, right? But over time, there are signs that we are on the right. Yeah,
definitely. And energy goes where energy flows where our attention goes, right?
Yeah.
So the more that we give our attention to that, and the less that we give our attention to divisiveness, and the kind of what unfortunately has become incredibly mainstream, the faster it's going to go. I mean, it's as simple as that. I think it's also incredibly positive that we don't need to look for something new. We already have everything we need.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's incredible. And that just needs to be rediscovered.
Yeah.
And we have it. That's what leadership is about. And in organizations today, the CEOs that I've seen speak, okay, they're brilliant minds, and how they see the world is extraordinary. But we see more and more that leadership is gone from the kind of old style military way of doing things to human connection and doing good for the world and love, and we are going in the right direction. There's no question.
Amazing. Yeah. There's hope for sure. I see.
No question.
Yeah, I see it too.
And even the whole movement that you're such a big part of here in Miami, it's extraordinary.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's fairly new too. Yeah.
I don't know whether this is useful from an interview perspective or whether it'll be cut out. But one of the amazing things about Miami Made is that you're not charging thousands and thousands of dollars to be a member.
Yeah.
What you are charging is enough to be able to run the events that you do.
Yeah, just cover the space.
So you cover the space and you cover the costs. And that's very, very, very evident. And I think that that's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's not like some of the other clubs that you have to spend thousands of dollars being a part of.
Yeah, because their run is more of as a business. The business is a primary function of it existing, and then the secondary is the community aspect.
And so I'm not saying that there should be no financial return for being part of community, but it needs to be measured in terms of what are the expenses, and what's the time that I put in, and I need to be paid for that, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
So
awesome. And so as the last notes, maybe how can people find you? Any resources you want people check out, point people to any places? So
people can find me through my website. So that's Doug Manuel, Manuel .com. The documentary is called Beats as One, which is beatsas1.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn, which is where I kind of play, which is Doug Manuel 69, which is my year of birth, just to
69. Yeah.
Qualify why I chose that number.
That is, exactly. Awesome. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. This was amazing. Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone who's still watching and listening, you also enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you and hear you on the next one.
Great. Thanks, Karel. It's been great to be with you.
Yeah. Awesome.